Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Inside the Americas. Coming up, the United States marks a grim milestone in the coronavirus pandemic. 500,000 Americans have now died from COVID-19. Lawmakers in the U.S. state of Virginia vote to abolish the death penalty. The move closes the chapter on a long history of capital punishment in the state. And the wife of Mexican drug lord El Chapo picked up by U.S. authorities. Emma Coronel Guzman charged with distributing cocaine, heroin, and other drugs while her husband serves a life sentence at a prison in the United States. Now we begin with that grim milestone reached in the United States. 500,000 people, that's 500,000 in the country, have now died from COVID-19. Despite the recent drop in fatalities, President Joe Biden called on Americans to continue to wear a mask and get vaccinated. Life in the U.S., like much of the world, hasn't been normal over the past year. Some schools in the country have been shut since March, and the debate over kids returning to classrooms has become extremely tense.
Parents take to the streets, furious at teachers.
Figure it out, or get off the podium!
On the other side, many teachers say they fear for their lives in the classroom. This is the battle for America's schools. On the outskirts of Washington, at the home of Sandra Davis, class is already underway.
So where are we exactly?
We're in school in the United States for over 300 days.
Her 17-year-old son has been taking classes via laptop for a year now.
We did it for like 3 months. It was okay. It wasn't the worst, but now that we've been doing it for an entire year, I feel like I'm missing out on school and education.
In his senior year, Eric's become less diligent, unable to focus for a full 80-minute class. In the Yashar family, 8-year-old Grant is getting ready for a maths lesson.
God, I have 5 minutes until my class starts.
And his video link is not working. Technology issues are a regular challenge to deal with. Shona Yashar has had enough.
Above opening restaurants, above opening retail establishments, school is absolutely essential for these kids.
If public schools are staying closed, it's because unions have mobilized teachers to protest.
Still not safe! Still not safe!
Making sure that we have proper PPE, that we have proper ventilation in our classrooms.
Negotiations are stalled on vaccinations. Teachers are not a priority group.
Lots of us haven't been able to get a vaccine yet, so I would be really concerned about being back in person.
The impasse has lasted a year so far, but Joe Biden has promised to reopen schools within the first 100 days of his presidency.
Tiger Woods suffered serious injuries to his right leg after his car rolled over several times near Los Angeles. Rescue teams needed to pry the American golfer from the vehicle before he underwent major surgery. While his injuries are not life-threatening, law enforcement say he's very fortunate to have survived. Lawmakers in Virginia have voted to abolish the death penalty. This marks the end of a long history of capital punishment in the state. Virginia has the highest number of executions in the country. And to talk more about this, we can bring in France 24's Valérie Dekimpe. Valerie, talk us through why the state has such a deadly track record.
Well, Virginia has long been considered to be a heartland death penalty state. Virginia's first execution dates back to 1608, when the state used to be a colony, and since then Virginia has executed nearly 1,400 people. And there are several factors that explain why Virginia has such a deadly track record. For a long time in Virginia, judges did not need to clarify, to specify that a person who received a life sentence could be deemed ineligible for parole. And that's why juries often tended to impose the death sentence.
And then, of course, there's the race element as well.
Of course, Virginia being a southern state, there is a connection between capital punishment and the state's history of slavery, of segregation. Between 1900 and 1977, Virginia executed 73 black defendants for convictions of rape, attempted rape, or armed robbery. No white Virginians were executed for those crimes. And more recently, racial inequality continues to play a role in capital punishment. Virginia had very strict and complicated rules rules when it came to the death penalty. So that means that poorer defendants were not always able to pay for experienced lawyers, attorneys, and were more likely to be executed without any meaningful review of their cases. This has evolved over time. The last execution in Virginia was in 2017, but there are two men who are still in Virginia's death row, and both of them are Black.
Now, abolishing the death penalty has been gaining traction in the state for years. So why the shift now?
Well, the abolition of the death penalty is the latest in a series of progressive measures put forward by lawmakers in Virginia. And since 2019, Democrats have had a majority both in the House and the Senate, this for the first time in over 2 decades. And it's a flip driven in part by demographics, changing demographics, but also a rebuke of President Donald Trump, who in his last months in office, he approved federal executions for 13 people. And according to local NGOs, that really gave momentum to the anti-death penalty movement in Virginia. Then there was the Black Lives Matter protests in 2020, and racial justice issues were really pushed to the forefront of the conversation. And for many people, the death penalty is just another example of racial inequality in the United States, another example of how Black people are treated unequally. And so in Virginia, 56% of people are in favor of repealing the death penalty. So in a way, lawmakers are just really catching up with public opinion. And I have a map that I want to show you here. Overall, in the United States, 22 states have already banned the death penalty. Virginia will become the 23rd state to do so. 3 other states, California, Pennsylvania, and Oregon, they have put in place a moratorium. But in a majority of states, the death penalty is still legal. And the fact that Virginia is the first southern state to abolish the death penalty, well, that is a major development for activists who say that if abolition can gain steam in Virginia, then it means that it can gain traction in other places in the country, and hopefully more states will follow suit.
I saw that Alaska was blue. I learned something today. Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Valérie Dekimpe there. Here's a look at some of the other stories making headlines from Latin America. Argentina's president has dismissed claims a crime had been committed in a scandal over queue jumping for the coronavirus vaccine. The country's health minister resigned last week at the president's request. This after it emerged that their friends had been able to get a COVID-19 inoculation by skipping the line. Shares in Brazil's state-run oil company Petrobras have partly regained their losses. This following news that President Jair Bolsonaro was changing the company's chief executive. A former defense minister was named as CEO, replacing a well-regarded economist. The move fueled fears that the far-right leader would try to intervene in energy prices as he eyes a re-election next year. And the wife of Mexican drug lord El Chapo has been arrested. 31-year-old Emma Coronel Guzman was picked up at Dulles Airport and was charged with distributing cocaine, heroin, and other drugs. Her husband, the former boss of the powerful Sinaloa drug cartel, is currently serving a life sentence at a prison in the United States. Next, scientists at NASA have unveiled images of last week's rover named Perseverance landing on Mars. The footage was recorded by a series of cameras mounted at different angles of the spacecraft. Microphones also captured a light gust of wind, the first ever recorded on Mars. Take a listen. From cancer survivor to the youngest American in space, 29-year-old Haley Arsenault has been named as the second participant in SpaceX's first civilian mission. It's a dream come true for the medical worker who says she hopes her adventure will inspire her patients to dream big. Julia Kim has a story.
A golden ticket to the final frontier. At 29 years old, Haley Arsenault will soon become the youngest American in space, but she's already over the moon.
He basically said, "Do you want to go to space?" And immediately I said yes, absolutely.
Arsenault was selected for her role as a frontline health worker and for symbolizing hope. Diagnosed with bone cancer at 10 years old, she defeated the disease, but will always carry the metal rods that replaced parts of her leg bone. She'll also become the first person with a prosthetic body part to go to space.
I really hope to inspire patients going through cancer treatment and other survivors that anything is possible. You know, I never thought I'd be going to space.
For Jared Isaacman, the billionaire behind the Inspiration 4 mission, it's about representing all the people of Earth and not just what he termed as rich white guys.
The NASA selection process, you have a better chance of getting hit by lightning. We are opening up this crew selection process to everyday people. You have folks walking around today that don't realize in 30 days from now they're going to get fitted for a spacesuit.
At the end of this year, 4 civilians, including Isaacman himself, will lift off from Florida and orbit the Earth. 2 places on board still remain up for grabs for an experience that's literally out of this world.
And finally, as winter storms continue to engulf the United States, parts of Niagara Falls froze over, the iconic landmark becoming its very own winter wonderland with chunks of ice seen floating in the water. And while the images make it seem like the falls themselves were frozen, that wasn't the case. Despite the frigid conditions, falls at Niagara Falls never stopped flowing. That's it for this edition of Inside the Americas. From all of us on the team, thank you very much for watching.
It's a concept that's central to life here in France, yet it's controversial and often misunderstood.
We're talking about laïcité, France's special brand of secularism, the separation of church and state.
Its backers say it's the glue that keeps the French together despite their differences. Its critics say it's anti-religious and increasingly used to stigmatize Muslims.
People have different conceptions, views about laicity. The big debate is about neutrality, guaranteeing everybody is treated equally. How can you give enough freedom without this freedom being dangerous for democracy?
So is laïcité compatible with a modern multicultural society? Join us for this episode of French Connections Plus.
French Connections Plus, presented by Jeannie Godula and Florence Villeminot.